Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Hack, and in today's video, we're exploring one of my favorite builds for New World called the Battlemage, a heavy armor frontline fighter that specializes in massive area effects, slash and burn damage, all while maintaining insane defense and self-healing. This build is perfect for solo gameplay in New World, whether you're out questing, exploring, or farming enemies for loot and experience. And the further along you get in the game, the more invincible this build becomes. Plus, it's just a blast to play, so let's dive right into the build. Alright, first let's talk about attributes for a battle mage in New World. Now, this gets pretty interesting because of our choice of weapons. Basically, we're going to be combining fire magic with scales with intelligence, and melee weapons which are going to primarily scale with strength. So early on especially, we will be combining those two main attributes, again, intelligence and strength. Now further on, and as we approach endgame on this build, your main attribute will actually be intelligence. Intelligence will give us some great passives like bonus critical damage, bonus elemental damage, mana back after a dodge, and up to 30% duration to our damage over time effects. This is where the majority of our damage is going to come from. Now yes, in addition to this, we will be using a melee weapon which scales with strength, but it's best not to split up your points too much if you can help it. The best way to accomplish this in New World is to pick up a melee weapon with an empty gem slot and then slot in some type of elemental gem like bonus fire damage, lightning damage. And when we do this, a portion of our damage from this weapon will actually scale with intelligence. Meaning by pushing intelligence as our main attribute, not only are we buffing those obviously magical skills, but we'll also be buffing our sword at the same time, making for a true battle mage build. Now, as we said, a little bit of strength is fine, especially starting out. You also want to pick up some pieces with Constitution if you can. Constitution is great for increasing our base health on the build, which is going to let us survive and stand our ground for longer. Plus the passive bonus that you get from Constitution to your health potions. Once you reach 50 con, that's going to be very valuable on this setup. Now in terms of consumables on this build, you'll want to start off right away with a basic food option, either light rations or travel rations, something like that. This food is extremely helpful whether you're playing solo or in a group because it slowly restores your health over time. Keep in mind too that when you consume this food, it gives you a faster heal over time for about 20 seconds. You get that bonus healing as long as you're not getting hit. And as we get further along in the game, there will be bonus attribute food, different options that can buff our intelligence or our constitution or a combination of stats. And then for potions, you'll want to keep on hand the two main types of potions, that is health potions and mana potions. Weak health potions will be fine at first, but you'll eventually want to upgrade those. Either get the common health potions or the strong health potions for emergencies because those do give you the biggest heal. And then obviously mana potions, since we are using mana on this build for magical abilities. These actually have two separate cooldowns on your character, so it's fine to run both of them at the same time. All right, let's talk about the gear setup next, starting with our armor. Heavy armor for this build, I just felt like, in terms of light, medium, or heavy, I like the extra defense. I like the extra block stability, the bonus to crowd control debuffs. Yes, you could do medium, you could do light if you wanted to, but I just felt like I wanted to be very tanky on this build, and so I'm using actually all heavy pieces. So 5 heavy armor pieces on this build, including the shield, because we are running sword and shield. Now, what do you want to look for? Well, interestingly enough, there is a set called the Battlemage, which you can pick up in New World, and this gives us exactly what we need when we talked about the buffs and the attributes that we want on this build, strength and intelligence. If you find this set, the Battlemage set, it's going to work pretty well on this build. Other traits you might want to look out for, Constitution, that's always going to be good for a solo style build like this. You want as much health as possible. And then obviously the strength is going to buff our sword and shield abilities. The intelligence will buff our flame staff abilities. Here's another decent set you can look out for, the Barbarian set. This is going to give you strength and constitution. So that's going to be quite good for your stats as well. Now on the shield, I would recommend a kite shield just for the extra armor rating that you get from this, the extra block stability. This kite shield of the sentry is actually pretty good. It gives me constitution as well. And I also picked up a refreshing trait, so that's going to reduce the cooldowns just slightly there. So that's pretty decent. Now, in terms of the weapons, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. I am using the sword and shield as the primary weapon, as we said. And I actually have a gem slot on this. This is a faction piece, actually. So this is picked up from faction gear. from running those faction missions. I have a separate video on this. If you're interested, I'll put a link for that in the description. But basically, this is just a good way to get some quality gear pieces early on in the game. Run a few of those faction missions, PvE or PvP, whatever you prefer. Save up those faction tokens, and then these weapons are some of the earliest weapons you can get with the gem slots. And for the gem slot on this Battle Mage style build, I actually put in a magic-based gem. So lightning damage, the electrified trait here, 20% of the damage is going to be converted to lightning. And that's going to scale off the weapon stat or intelligence, whichever is higher. So since we are putting the majority of our points into intelligence, you will see higher damage on this than if you just had a longsword by itself. That works out pretty well for damage. There's other gems you can get. You can go fire damage, you can go ice damage, you can go arcane, you could do void damage, whatever you feel like. I was fighting a lot of the ancients, and so ancients are actually weak to the lightning damage, electrified. So you might want to think about where you're farming, mobs and stuff. See what they're weak to, and then find a gem that fits that type of damage. That's the longsword, and then for the fire staff, any old fire staff is going to be fine for you as you're starting out. If you can find one with intelligence as the attribute there on it, that's going to be ideal. Again, you want as much intelligence on your staff as possible to maximize that damage. So there you go. That is the staff. Talk about our weapon skills next, starting with the sword and shield, which is going to be our main bread and butter DPS skill. I love sword and shield in New World, actually, because it does a lot of cleave damage, a lot of AOE potential here, and it's very defensive. It's very high survivability in terms of you have extra damage, you have extra healing, damage absorption, so it's really good for sort of a solo-focused build like this. Now, early on, we're going to start with Sword Master. You can actually pick this up first. It's quite good. It gives you AOE damage with a pretty decent cooldown as well. This is going to be the main ability that we take from the Sword Master skill tree. You will want to get the passives eventually, so Opportunity is going to cause Rend for 10 seconds. That reduces the target's armor. And then here's a great one, Tactical Strike. Reduces the cooldowns on your ability by 10%. So you can get this up pretty quick when you're fighting against multiple enemies. And you should be pulling enemies together. Like we said earlier, this build is great for farming enemies for weapon experience. Over here on the defender's side, I would start with Sturdy Shield. So this just gives you bonus, passive physical armor, which is great. And then hop right into Shield Bash. It's going to be your main stun on the build. So this is great for bosses, mini bosses out in the open. And if you angle this right, if you aim this at multiple targets, you can get the stun off on multiple enemies at once, by the way. So decent stun here. With the passives, you'll get a longer stun. You also get 100% more damage on Intimidating Bash. And here we can see Concussive Bash, the extra stun duration by 1 second. So about 3-second stun at base here once you have the passives maxed out. And then our final ability here is going to be Defiant Stance. And I love this ability for solo farming because of the damage reduction, first of all. So it's going to decrease your incoming damage by 30% for 8 seconds. And then with the passives, you get a lot more out of this too. Final Countdown gives you 20% bonus damage reduction. Just make sure you pop this skill when you're above 50% health. And then Restoration gives you a nice heal, 15% of your max health when the Defiant Stance ends. In terms of other passives, I would unlock in Defender. Recuperation is nice. This increases your incoming healing by 10%. Sturdy Grip gives you a reduced stamina damage when you're blocking a melee attack. You'll be doing that quite often on this build. Defensive Training is great. This is a great passive buff. When you block, you gain 10% Fortify for 5 seconds. Elemental Resistance is great because a lot of bosses are elemental based or they have like magic attacks. So reducing all of that incoming damage by 10%, awesome. Final Blow, this is actually really good. The third attack in your light attack chain deals 15% more damage. You'll definitely want that once you have the points. A lot of the final passives here are more group oriented. So you might not need those for a solo setup like this. I would just probably get more passives. So that is the sword and shield skills. So quick demo on the sword and shield skills for this setup. Basically, after you've pulled a bunch of enemies, you'll want to swap to your sword and shield and kind of group them up together. You can block while you're doing this, and then you can use Defiant Stance as well to reduce your incoming damage. But we're just trying to group them up as tightly as possible, then just start wailing on them with those sweeping sword light attacks. You can combine in Whirling Blades for this too. And then finally hit them all with a Shield Bash for a nice stun on all enemies in the area. Remember that Defiant Stance will give you a nice juicy heal when that effect ends. And it's going to give you tons of damage reduction, up to 50%, letting you soak up a lot of that damage. All right, let's talk about Fire Staff now. So this build really came about when I was just trying to level up Fire Staff, and I noticed that it went really well with the Sword and Shield because we have a lot of AoE damage in the Fire Staff, and we also have some passive healing similar to Sword and Shield. So it actually, you wouldn't think of it right away, but they actually go together pretty well, and it's great for AoE farming especially. You can see I'm focused almost entirely in the Pyromancer tree. We'll talk about in a minute how I might go over to Fire Mage a little bit later. But for right now, I would just start with Flamethrower. It's a really basic skill. It does AoE damage over time. You can do a lot of damage actually on a full tank of mana. So it's a pretty decent ability. From there, we will go into Incinerate, which is my favorite Fire Staff ability for this setup so far. So this is a fire-based AoE, and it's a circle, so it's truly 360 degrees around you with flame damage. It's also going to cause enemies to catch on fire, dealing additional damage over time for 6 seconds. Now, I really like the upgrades for this. So Scorched gives you an additional stack of burning, so that damage over time effect is now going to be doubled. Next up, we have Cauterized Wounds, so you're going to restore 20% of the damage dealt as health. Now, this can rack up a lot of health if you're fighting against multiple enemies, and that's where the strength of this build really comes into play. You don't want to be fighting, ones and twos. You want to pull in a group of like 5 to 6 enemies, hit them with your Incinerate, and then you're getting heals off every single enemy. And then that's where the power of this build really comes into play. We'll show that later in the gameplay too. Flame Out, this doubles your damage of Incinerate, so you get a double effect here. Incinerate hits twice. So these are awesome. I would unlock all the upgrades. I have also Burnout. Burnout is another damage over time, so you're going to apply another burn effect. The great thing about this, though, is mobility. So not only mobility, but it also lets you pass through enemies. So basically what you can do is you can lay down your Incinerate, and then Burnout, you're going to just flash through enemies, get some distance, and then you can swap over to your Sword and Shield. I don't have the upgrades unlocked. This might be decent, actually. So you're going to reduce your cooldowns by 5% for each enemy hit. So if we have like 6 enemies in front of us, that's a 30% cooldown reduction. That might be decent. I wouldn't use this one heated up. I wouldn't go 50% further because you're just going to be too far away from enemies. It's going to kind of defeat the purpose of this build, which is very in your face. Oh, let me go back. If you're using Flamethrower, I forgot to mention these. They're actually pretty good. Fire's Reach, 50% range extension. And then Eternal Flames increases the damage of Flamethrower by 25%. That's really good. And Pyro Dancer is pretty crazy. Flamethrower has no cooldown. I haven't actually tried this yet. I don't have enough points. The thing to remember is that Flamethrower does cost 5 mana per second. So if you were going to unlock this, you'd need some pretty high mana recovery for this to work. Now, last thing I'll say about this, I don't know if I'm going to keep Flamethrower. I might actually switch this over eventually once I have enough points to Meteor Shower. Meteor Shower is pretty powerful still. It does AoE damage, which is the focus of this build. And it's not super strong at first, but once you look at the upgrades, for example, down here, Fire Rate Determination gives you Grit. So Grit means you cannot be interrupted. And I think that would be pretty good just to stand there, not get interrupted, and just cast this Meteor Shower and then be able to switch back to our Sword and Shield. So once I get more points, once the game releases, I will definitely check this out. You also get bonus damage, 25% bonus damage after the initial impact. So I think this could be quite strong. Once you have enough points, definitely play around with that, and I would put that in place of Flamethrower. And how do you make the Fire Staff work? Well, again, we basically grouped up all the enemies together as tightly as possible. Then we're going to lay down Incinerate for some nice damage over time, some pushback. Remember that once you've upgraded Incinerate, it actually heals you back based on the percentage of the damage you deal. So the more enemies you hit with it, the more healing you get. From there, you can use Burnout next. Burnout will create some nice distance as you basically just fly through enemies, again, dealing more AoE damage, more damage over time. Give yourself some space. You can then reset the fight if you want. You can go back to your sword and shield, or you could use your final fire staff ability, whether that's flamethrower just to burn them down. You could also use a ranged ability, like we mentioned, maybe fireball, maybe meteor shower, whatever you feel like fits this setup the best for you. Right, everybody, with that said, that's going to wrap up our Battle Mage build video for New World. If you enjoyed this video or you found it informative, do us a favor and crush that like button. We are a brand new channel here on YouTube, so every like, comment, and subscribe really, really helps us out. And then just a quick reminder that we do have a New World wiki along with written guides for all of the builds that we've been putting out on the channel lately. Links to those will be down in the description below. Over in those written guides, we have a lot more detail on these builds, where we list out all the skills, the upgrades, the passives, different skill options for leveling up the build from the start of the game, and a lot more. So definitely worth your time to check those out. Plus, we have a lot of other guides in the New World Wiki now where we talk about attributes, armor types, weapon mastery, pretty much everything you need to know to get started in New World. That being said, thank you all again so much for watching, and we'll see you around in the next video.